Picture this. You're 13 years old. Your body is barely your own, but today, you'll become someone's wife. You've never kissed anyone. You've never chosen anything. But this morning, a man 3 times your age rides in with a priest and a contract. You don't understand the Latin vows, but the looks in the room tell you there's no escape. This isn't a wedding. It's a transaction. This is medieval marriage. In medieval Europe, marriage wasn't about love. It was power, property, and legacy. If you were lucky, you'd survive it. If not, you'd be replaced. Girls were often betrothed before they could even speak, at age 7 or younger, and married off by 12. The bride's father chose the groom. The bride's body sealed the deal. Her consent? Irrelevant. Her feelings? Unrecorded. What mattered was lineage. Most girls didn't marry for romance. They married for survival. To be unmarried by 15 was a danger. A girl with no husband was seen as wild, suspicious, even cursed. Families feared shame more than abuse. They'd marry off a daughter to an old drunkard if it kept the neighbors quiet. Even peasant girls weren't exempt. A marriage might mean fewer mouths to feed. One less dowry. One more laborer. Your body became currency. A dowry could include land, livestock, or silver, but it also came with expectations. If you didn't produce sons, your worth declined. Some husbands sent barren wives back to their families in disgrace. Others took mistresses openly, and some punished them, physically, repeatedly, because legally, a husband could discipline his wife. It wasn't called abuse, it was called marriage. What about love? It did exist, but rarely inside marriage. Courtly love was a fantasy, reserved for poems and songs. Real love happened in secret, between knights and mistresses, between kitchen maids and shepherds, between people who had the freedom to choose. For most married couples, love came after years, or not at all. Some lived like strangers. Others, like jailer and prisoner. The wedding night wasn't private. In many regions, villagers escorted the bride and groom to bed, drunk, cheering, crude. In noble courts, priests or family members might witness the consummation. The couple's privacy was not respected. It was proven. Bloody sheets were displayed. If no blood appeared, whispers began. Was she pure? Was he a man? Their reputations lived or died on that linen. Virginity was everything, at least for women. A girl's value depended on the perception of purity. Even rumors of premarital affection could destroy her prospects. Noble girls were locked away until marriage, often guarded by wet nurses or nuns. One stolen kiss could ruin everything. Meanwhile, noblemen flaunted bastards. Knights visited brothels without shame. A boy's sexuality was praised. A girl's was policed. And yet, the church controlled it all. Canon law dictated the rules of marriage: age, consent, sex, separation, but enforcement was inconsistent. Technically, both parties had to agree to wed. But if a child was pressured? If a girl cried at the altar? If a boy mumbled assent with his father glaring behind him? It still counted. And once consummated, it was permanent. No annulment. No escape. Some girls married men older than their fathers. In royal and noble marriages, a girl of 11 might be wed to a man in his 50s. She would become a mother before she became a teenager. If she survived childbirth, midwives weren't always trained. Herbs and prayers substituted for medicine. Mortality rates were staggering. Many girls didn't live past their first or second child. Childbirth was a battlefield. There were no sterilized tools, no anesthetics, no blood transfusions. A breech baby could kill both mother and child. Midwives used hooks and knives. Prayers were whispered, but screams often won. Some women bled to death. Others were cut open and left to rot. Every pregnancy was a gamble, one she was expected to take again and again. For many, marriage was a sentence. There were no divorces, only annulments, and those were rare. A woman couldn't accuse her husband of abuse unless he nearly killed her, and even then, courts hesitated. A man could beat his wife with a stick no thicker than his thumb. He could imprison her, starve her, and if she ran away, she was hunted like property. Infidelity was fatal for women. A cheating husband might be mocked. A cheating wife might be stoned. In France and England, public punishments included flogging, shaming, and mutilation. In Italy and parts of Germany, noble women were executed for adultery, especially if their husbands were powerful. A single affair could cost a woman her life and her children their legitimacy. Even queens weren't safe. Take in Bullen. Married to Henry VIII, she failed to produce a male heir. Rumors of affairs, most unfounded, were enough to justify her execution. Her marriage had been political. Her death was too, in many ways. She was the most famous victim of medieval marital expectations: produce sons or die trying. But the peasants didn't fare much better. In the fields and towns, peasants married young, often for survival. A marriage meant shared labor, protection, and food. But it didn't mean choice. Fathers arranged matches based on plowshares, not affection. A girl might marry the son of a neighbor she'd feared all her life. Her tears changed nothing. Her silence was mistaken for consent. Sex was strictly regulated, but rarely followed. The church insisted sex must be within marriage, only for procreation, and only in the missionary position. Anything else was deemed sinful, even between spouses. Yet behind stone walls, these rules collapsed. Husbands forced wives into acts that priests condemned. Wives suffered in silence. Marital rape wasn't illegal. It wasn't even a concept. A husband owned his wife's body completely. Love letters existed, but rarely in marriage. Some noble lovers sent poems, tokens, and clandestine notes across castle walls. Monks and scribes preserved these romantic exchanges in parchment and ink. But most were affairs, relationships outside of the marriage contract. Within marriage, letters were about duty, about heirs, about taxes. Even the language of affection was rationed. Wife was often replaced with partner, companion, or simply mother of my sons. And then came widowhood. For some women, the death of a husband was the only escape from misery. But freedom was short-lived. The expectation was to remarry quickly, especially if she was still of childbearing age. A widow without sons might lose her husband's land to his brother. She could be cast out of her home. In some areas, a widow had to buy her own children back from male relatives. Some women resisted. Quietly, boldly, fatally. There are rare, whispered stories of wives who poisoned abusive husbands. Some ran away, disguised as men, and joined the army or the church. Others fled into forests or foreign towns, carving out new lives as healers, spinners, or midwives. The law called them criminals, but history remembers them as survivors. Marriage was supposed to be sacred, but often became political violence. In royal courts, girls were exchanged like diplomatic gifts. A peace treaty might require a king's daughter to marry the enemy prince. Sometimes the bride had to convert religions. Sometimes she had to renounce her language. Always, she had to smile. The wrong marriage could ignite wars. The right one could cement empires. Girls as young as 5 were engaged. Engagements were contracts, signed, sealed, and often irreversible. By 9, a girl might be sent to live with her future husband's family, raised in his household to become a compliant wife. She would serve his mother, obey his father, and be trained for her role. Sometimes, that training included consummation before she even reached puberty. Convents became escape, but not freedom. Nunneries were filled with daughters whose families couldn't afford dowries. Some girls took vows by force. Others fled abusive homes and were placed in the church for protection. But behind those high stone walls, abuse continued by superiors, visiting priests, or even other nuns. The veil didn't guarantee peace. It merely disguised captivity as sanctity. Even lawbooks betrayed women. In many medieval legal systems, a woman had no independent legal identity after marriage. She couldn't own land. She couldn't testify in court against her husband. She couldn't escape him, even with proof of violence. He could imprison her within his estate. He could deny her food. He could claim her wages. Her vows bound her to silence. Not even childbirth gave her power. In some cultures, a woman who died during labor without confessing her sins was believed to be cursed. Midwives performed baptisms on stillborns, fearing their souls would be trapped. If a mother survived, her first duty wasn't rest, it was to try again. She was expected to have as many children as possible, even if each one might kill her. But hope wasn't completely lost. By the late Middle Ages, things began to shift. The Black Death wiped out a third of Europe's population. Labor became scarce. Peasants gained power. Women, suddenly more valuable in the workforce, began to demand more say in their lives and their marriages. For a brief moment in history, survival gave them leverage. The cracks had begun to form. Marriage could destroy queens as easily as peasant girls. Take Isabella of France. Married to Edward II of England, She endured humiliation as he favored male companions over her. Eventually, she rebelled, staging a coup and having him imprisoned and allegedly murdered. Her marriage, made for diplomacy, ended in blood. Even crowned women weren't immune to betrayal and silencing. And then there was Margaret Beaufort. She was just 12 when she was married. By 13, she gave birth to the future King Henry VII. The childbirth nearly killed her. She never had another child. Her story shows the chilling truth. Even when a girl's womb birthed a dynasty, her life was expendable. The survival of lineage mattered more than the survival of the mother. Some regions practiced wife selling. Yes, really. In parts of rural England by the late medieval period, if a man wanted to be rid of his wife, divorce being illegal, he might lead her to market with a rope around her neck and auction her off. It was half mockery, half desperation. The woman, often abused or shamed, had no power in the transaction. Her dignity was the price. Honor killings weren't isolated. In Mediterranean regions and parts of Central Europe, a girl accused of dishonoring her family, even by being raped, could be killed by her own relatives. Courts looked away. Community whispers carried the blame. A girl's blood was seen as the only way to cleanse shame. Marriage was no refuge. It was often the motive for the murder. And the church? It was complicit. Priests sanctified these marriages. They turned a blind eye to abuse. They advised wives to obey, even in suffering. Some condemned women for their own beatings, claiming they had failed in their duty. Wives were told to endure pain with silence and piety. Martyrdom was their moral standard. Resistance was sin. What about men who loved their wives? They existed. Some records show noblemen grieving deeply for dead wives, funding chapels and writing tributes. A few even refused to remarry. But these were exceptions, not norms. Emotional connection in marriage was seen as a bonus, not a goal. Most marriages were alliances, not unions of hearts. Marriages were also tools of colonialism. As European powers expanded, marriage was used to dominate other cultures. Christian colonizers forced indigenous women into unions with soldiers and settlers. These marriages legitimized land theft and cultural erasure. The women were expected to convert, obey, and breed a new generation of civilized subjects. Their traditions were overwritten by forced vows. Even medical texts failed them. Medieval medicine saw women as defective men, lesser, colder, leakier. They were blamed for miscarriage, cursed for stillbirths, and punished for infertility. One English text claimed a woman who couldn't conceive was likely too lustful or too lazy. Her womb was considered a vessel, and if it failed, she failed. No science, just shame. And yet, they survived. Women formed networks, quiet alliances between midwives, servants, healers, and mothers. They shared knowledge, herbs, stories, and warnings. Some left behind journals. Others became legends whispered across centuries. Their resistance may have been small, but it was fierce. Against all odds, many endured. Some even loved. Today, the myths persist. We still hear stories of noble knights and pure maidens, of weddings under moonlight and faithful husbands. But the truth? It's darker. The medieval marriage system was built on inequality, violence, and control, and the echoes of it still shape gender roles, laws, and expectations today. So why does it matter now? Because history isn't dead. Every time someone says, marriage used to be better, they ignore the screams hidden beneath cathedral floors. They erase the girls who died in childbirth, the wives who never had a voice, and the systems that bound love in chains. Telling the truth is how we honor them. And you, viewer, listener, survivor of modern myths, now know. You've walked through stone halls, heard the wedding vows no child should speak, and watched the veil become a shroud. You've seen marriage not as a union of hearts, but a transaction of power. If you've made it this far, you've honored those who couldn't speak for themselves. So let me ask you, which part of this history disturbed you most? Was it the age gaps? The forced consummations? The dowries? The disappearances? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's build a space where truth speaks louder than tradition. Subscribe to Histoeureka for more dark, unfiltered stories from the past. Because what we forget, we repeat. And the past doesn't sleep. Neither should your curiosity.